Today we're going to be working on a landscape with a little bit more color. So we're going to start with the stuff that's furthest away from us in the image, which is going to be our background sky. Let's see, I'm going to have a large, medium large brush for this. And I want this to be fairly faded. So I'm going to go through first, and I'm going to add in just the water. Again, you might have to look sideways at your paper. You'll notice that I'm doing kind of an oval circle scrubbiness to get it worked into the paper back here. And then I'm going to go in with some of my ultramarine, and I'm just going to start blopping a little bit. We're going to pretend like it's kind of a cloudy day. Maybe it's near sunset. So it's okay if these ones stay rounded since we're working up in the sky. Remember, if it starts running dry, add some more water in there. Keep an eye on the edge of where you're working. If it gets too dark, go back in and just work it with water. Just kind of like that. You'll balance out this side by making it a little darker. That. And then I want just a touch of red in my sky. So I'm going to pull just a little bit of that alizarin crimson in there. Not too much. Rinse out my brush. Go back in with that water and just give it a few pops. I don't mind the bubbles. I'm going to add some extra texture to it. Go back and work my blues. You kind of work them back and forth a little bit like that. And then we're going to take a look. Let's see, I'm not happy with this hard line up here. So I'm going to go back and take that out. I'm going to fade some of this out. It's gotten a little heavier than I would like to see. Add more water where that didn't mix well. Go. Now I kind of crumple my paper towel. This is one of those techniques you can do to kind of get it crumply and bumpy, right? I'm going to go in, I'm going to dab my sky. It has all that extra in there I don't need. There we go, kind of like that. So now it's a nice hazy sky. And I can take my blow dryer and blow dry this real quick, or you might have to let it dry for about 10 or 15 minutes. I want to be thinking about where I'm going to be putting in the different parts of my landscape. So I'm going to grab a pencil, and before I go any further, I'm going to think about how maybe I want to add in kind of a road that comes out from the distance. Now, if it's getting further away from us, it needs to get smaller as it moves away from us, wider as it moves towards us, right? Might want to put in kind of like a little tree down the road. So thinking about how that's going to come up. It'll take in kind of this space in here for the tree, right? And then maybe I have some fields. They're going to come out and away. Our road keeps moving. I think I want my road at more of an angle than when I had it. And I'm drawing really light so that if I change my mind, I can go back in and change things. Kind of my angles a little bit better so it's more dramatic towards the back there. And then I might have some closer rolling hillsides. They're going to come here and up. And then I might have some mountains that are really far in the background here where my clouds are naturally coming to a point. Now it's kind of fairly open, so I might imagine that there's like another tree over here someplace, and that's going to cast a shadow out over my road a little bit over here. And then maybe if this one's casting a shadow, this tree is going to cast a big shadow out this direction in my field as well. Now that I kind of have it planned out, I can go in and I can start refining some of these a little bit more. I'm going to start in the background, those furthest area away mountains, and those are under all those dark clouds that are kind of up in the sky. So I'm going to make sure first that my paper is dry, because it has to be dry since I'm painting up against it. I don't want it to be wet on wet back here. I want definitive mountain hills, and to do that, I'm going to make sure that they're nice and dark back here. So I'm going to do the edge first of those mountains, and I have to keep in mind where my tree is going to go. I'm going to have to sort of taper off a little bit, and then These could even go up and behind here. Since it's so much darker, it's going to end up covering it. So what I'm going to do, instead of adding more paint to my brush though, to fill this in, I'm just going to pull down a little bit across that mountain range like this. I have plenty of paint in my brush to keep this nice and dark. I don't need to lighten it up any. I go in under that tree. Very gently keep pulling down the dark into the other area. And you'll notice the more familiar you become with watercolor, the less often you have to go back and put more paint on your brush. You get used to how it feels and how much you need to load into it while you're working with it. Then I'm going to go back in with just water and move horizontally along that line to define it from the other hills that I'm working with that are kind of going to be in front of it. Just like that. You either have to let it dry or go ahead and get out your blow dryer for the next. Okay, so I've dried that off. Now I'm going to go in and I'm going to start adding some of my trees or bushes that I might be seeing in there. And I have my Hooker's green in here. This is my favorite green to use because it's a nice true feeling green. It's not too bright. It doesn't have undertones of the other colors in it. It's more of that actual green color. And because my mountains are darker, the bushes that are kind of in between are going to be a nice solid green color. And we're going to go back in and I want to keep them bumpy because they have leaves on them in there, right? These might be some that are sort of midway. They're not far away in the distance. They're getting a little closer to us, but they're definitely still kind of their own shape, right? We don't have to worry too much about defining each individual leaf on these, which is helpful, especially when working with watercolors. It gives you the general impression of leaves being there, but not actually having to paint each individual leaf. Go through like that. Rinse out my brush, dry it a little bit, and I'm going to pick up some ultramarine because I want to go through and put the shadows in. And then I'm going to do that on the undersides because that's where you're going to find most of the shadows in the bushes. Right? The sun's not going to get all the way through. It's going to put a shadow on the underside. So while they're still wet, I'm going to go back in and work that wet on wet technique with the edges. Just doing little dots so that they go up and into the green paint that's already in there. If you start running out of blue paint, you'll notice it doesn't tend to come off as easily and go up into the paint, kind of like that. Just for kicks, once in a while, you can add in an extra little blob up in the tree line, just in case it's a little bit thicker part of the bush. Maybe not quite as thinned out as the rest. And then I always like to add in just a little bit of brown, and I like to either use a burnt umber or a burnt sienna. I'm going to use a burnt sienna for this one since we're keeping things more towards the red tone. And I'm going to use a really thin brush for this when I add it in because I don't want to add much in at all. Just a little hint here and there of some wood or even maybe a bush that's not quite making it anymore, right? Not long to be left in the countryside, sort of like that. Now, this is another area where before we keep going, you can let it dry, or what I'm going to work on next is I'm going to work on the tree, since it's sort of in our next step. I'm going to pick up Payne's Gray for the trunk in here, and just a little bit of that burnt sienna as it moves up into the tree part. Like that. Now, trees are very similar to bushes. So I'm going to go through, I'm going to add my undersides of my tree first. Just go through like this for a couple of them. And then I'm going to switch over to the green. Get a lot on there. And depending on the kind of tree you want to do, you can kind of look at different clip art trees if you want, or different pictures of trees, and you'll notice their branches all grow a little different as they pile up from the bottom of the tree. Since we're painting more abstractly anyway, and more impressionistically. You don't have to worry quite as much about that with this tree, but you still, want to have a general idea of where it's going and what it's going to look like. Now, that was paint coming out of my tray, so I want to get rid of that before it dries on there. I'm going to add some water to it. I'm going to do that lifting technique. And as you know, it doesn't always come out completely, even if you catch it right away. So I'm probably going to end up with a little bit of green there anyway, which I did. That happens sometimes. So I'm going to keep going. My little piece of paint got sticky and just came out with my paintbrush that last time. Stuff happens in art. We fix it as best we can and we move on. That's right. Don't worry about it. Our tree is going to be just fine by the time we finish. I'm going to go back in with some of that ultramarine, right? Add some of those darker under areas, those branches in there, just like that. Now I'm at a point where I'm going to want to let this dry again. So now I'm going to go back in. These areas got a little dark, so I'm going to get my brush wet. I'm going to pick up just a little bit of yellow, not real a lot, just thin it out a little bit. I'm going to go back in. I'm going to scrub a little bit with that yellow. It's going to loosen up some of that paint, and then I'm going to peel it back off of those bushes because they were getting a little dark and hard to see over here. And by doing it with the yellow in the brush, it's keeping it a little bit more consistent with being part of the plant. And scrub a little bit with the yellow and then tap it with the brush. Now you can see it's really allowing those to pop a little bit more. And then this part, I'm just going to leave the yellow paint on the surface. Do a little bit of scrubbing over here. And that's just going back and forth with the brush. I'm not doing anything. I'm not doing circles or anything like that. This way I can do circles if I want to here, really gentle. Again, we want to be careful not to ruin our brushes. It's loosening up that paint, and then I'm just going to dab it off. So now it's creating some better highlights for me. I'm going to go back in, do the same thing with the tree to give it some more highlights. Especially down in here where it got really dark. Go. And then again, I could just go in with some yellow right on top and also leave the yellow. Some little dots in there to do some leaves. Remember, it's fairly transparent, so it's not going to show up as brightly once it dries. Kind of like that. Now it's starting to look a little more tree-like. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to work down here more into our fields, and we really want to bring back that yellow color down in the fields. We're going to start drawing that out as one of the main colors in the lower half of our picture. For this part, you're going to want to add in some yellow. Be careful when you're drawing it along that edge. You don't pull down the green, but fill in the space with that nice flat yellow. We're going to move horizontally with the horizon line, and then we're going to go back and add in the value and depth with other colors.